It was a clear autumn night in 1997 when Jake, a college student, decided to take a late-night drive home after a long study session at the library. The air was crisp, and the trees lining the country roads were ablaze with the fiery colors of fall. The road was winding, bordered by thick woods that loomed ominously in the moonlight. Jake was exhausted, his eyelids heavy as he navigated the familiar stretch of road that led to his small town. The radio played softly in the background, a soothing lull that almost made him forget the time. As he rounded a bend, something caught his eye. He squinted through the windshield and saw a figure standing in the middle of the road. His heart raced as he instinctively slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt. As the car came to a halt, Jake's breath caught in his throat. There, illuminated by the headlights, stood a woman in a white dress. She appeared disheveled, her hair hanging limply around her shoulders, and her face was obscured in shadows. "Are you okay?" Jake called out, his voice wavering. The woman didn't move, just stood there, staring at him with a haunting gaze. He felt a chill creep up his spine. Something about her demeanor was unsettling. Jake considered driving around her, but the road was narrow, and he didn't want to risk hitting her. "Hey! You need help?" he shouted again. Still no response. The woman remained motionless, a ghostly figure in the night. As he sat there, unsure of what to do, a memory flickered in his mind, stories he had heard about drivers encountering strange figures on desolate roads. He felt a mixture of fear and concern. Against his better judgment, he decided to get out of the car and see if she needed assistance. He stepped out into the cool night air, and the woman finally turned her head, her gaze fixed on him. He took a cautious step forward. "Do you need a ride?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Suddenly, she raised a finger and pointed down the road behind him. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "I need help, they're coming." Jake's heart raced as he glanced back at his car, suddenly feeling exposed in the darkness. "Who's coming?" he asked, trying to maintain a sense of composure. But when he looked back at her, she was gone. The road was empty, and the chill in the air intensified. Panic surged through him. Had he imagined her? He shook his head, his heart pounding. Then he heard it, a low rumbling sound, like an engine revving in the distance. It was coming closer, and it was loud. He jumped back into his car, heart racing as he locked the doors. He could see the faint glow of headlights approaching from behind. Before he could fully comprehend the situation, a truck sped past him, its tires kicking up gravel as it roared down the road. Jake's eyes widened as he noticed the driver, an older man with a wild look in his eyes. The man glanced over at Jake as he passed, and Jake felt a jolt of fear. The truck skidded to a halt a few yards down the road. The driver jumped out, running back toward Jake's car. "Get out of here," the man shouted, his voice strained and urgent. "They're coming for her. Get out now." Confusion washed over Jake. "What do you mean?" he yelled back, heart pounding as he peered through the windshield. But the man wasn't waiting for an explanation. He sprinted back toward the truck, glancing over his shoulder nervously. "They're not far behind," he shouted again. Jake's instincts kicked in. He had no idea what was happening, but he wasn't going to stick around to find out. He slammed his foot on the gas pedal and peeled away, the car lurching forward as he sped down the road. As he drove, he couldn't shake the image of the woman from his mind. Who was she? And what had the driver meant when he said, "They're coming for her"? He reached town and pulled into a gas station, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting an eerie glow on the empty parking lot. He couldn't help but glance back down the road, half expecting to see the woman or the truck reappearing in the distance. He took a moment to collect himself, breathing heavily as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. An old man emerged from the convenience store, and Jake felt a wave of relief at the sight of another person. He stepped out of the car, desperate for answers. "Hey, "Did you see a woman in white on the road?" Jake asked, urgency spilling from his lips. The old man raised an eyebrow, and his expression turned serious. "You're not the first to see her," he said gravely. "She's been spotted for years. People say she's looking for help, but no one knows what happened to her." Jake's stomach sank as he listened. "What do you mean? What happened?" The old man looked around, lowering his voice. "They say she was in an accident years ago. She never made it home. Some say her spirit lingers, trying to find her way back." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "And the man in the truck?" "Some say he tries to warn people," the old man replied. "But it's not always clear who he is. Just stay away from that stretch of road at night. It's not safe." With that, Jake realized he had narrowly escaped something far more sinister than he had imagined. The woman in white was more than a mere ghost, she was a harbinger of a deeper tragedy. He drove home, feeling haunted not just by what he saw, but by the chilling reminder that sometimes, the past refuses to remain buried. It was a cool September evening when Sarah decided to take a late-night drive along Highway 16, known as the Highway of Tears in British Columbia, Canada. This road was infamous for the many women who had disappeared along its stretches over the decades, leaving behind stories of tragedy and loss. But Sarah, an adventurous spirit, dismissed the tales as mere urban legends. She had just finished a long shift at the diner and was looking to clear her mind. The highway wound through thick forests and desolate stretches of land, the moon casting an eerie glow over the road. With her favorite playlist echoing in the car, she felt a sense of freedom. As she drove, she couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that she was being watched. She glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a pair of headlights trailing her, but the road was empty behind her. The deeper she traveled into the forest, the more the shadows seemed to close in around her. Then, out of nowhere, her car radio crackled to life, breaking the silence. A voice, a woman's voice, sounded frantic, filled with urgency. "Help me. Please. I'm on the highway." The transmission faded in and out, barely audible over the sound of the engine. Sarah's heart raced as she looked around, realizing she was alone on the road. She fumbled with the radio, trying to tune it back to her playlist, but the voice persisted, growing more desperate. "Help me. They're coming for me. Please. Is this some kind of prank?" Sarah muttered to herself, feeling the hair on the back of her neck stand on end. She turned the volume down and focused on the road ahead, determined to ignore the creeping dread settling in her stomach. But the unsettling voice continued to haunt her. The chilling words echoed in her mind, making it hard to concentrate. She noticed the trees around her were growing denser, the night air thick with tension. Every instinct told her to turn back, but she pushed forward, driven by a mix of curiosity and a need to escape the uncomfortable feelings. As she drove, she spotted something on the side of the road, a flash of white against the dark backdrop of the trees. Slowing down, she leaned closer to the windshield, trying to make out what it was. A figure, a woman in a white dress, stood there, her hair tangled and wild. Panic surged through Sarah, but she couldn't turn away. The woman raised her hand, as if beckoning Sarah to stop. "What do you want?" Sarah called out, but her voice trembled. She felt drawn to the woman, an inexplicable urge to help her. With a pounding heart, she pulled over and rolled down the window. "Are you okay? Do you need a ride?" The woman leaned closer, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. "Please. I need help. They're coming." Before Sarah could respond, she heard a low growl from the woods behind the woman. Her blood ran cold as she glanced in the direction of the sound. Shadows shifted among the trees, and a chill washed over her. Something was lurking just out of sight. "Get in!" Sarah shouted, panic rising. The woman hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. "Please, hurry. As the woman stepped closer, Sarah's instincts screamed at her to drive away, but she couldn't abandon someone in need. "Get in the car. Now." The woman opened the door and slid into the passenger seat, her breathing rapid and frantic. "Drive. Just drive," she urged, her voice trembling. Sarah floored the gas pedal, and the tires screeched as they took off down the highway. The woman pointed behind them, her eyes wide with terror. "They're coming. You have to go faster." "Who? What's happening?" Sarah shouted, glancing nervously in the rearview mirror. But the highway remained empty behind them. "I can't explain. Just keep driving," the woman pleaded, her voice rising in desperation. Suddenly, a loud thump echoed from the trunk of the car. Both women froze, fear coursing through them. Sarah's mind raced. What was in the trunk? The woman looked at her, panic etched on her face. "It's not safe. They'll find us." Ignoring the dread pooling in her stomach, Sarah pressed the accelerator harder. The engine roared, and they sped through the darkness, the headlights illuminating the road ahead. "Where are we going?" Sarah yelled, trying to maintain control of the situation. "To the gas station. It's safe there." The woman's eyes darted nervously around the car, her fingers trembling on her lap. As they approached the gas station, its flickering lights broke through the darkness, and relief flooded Sarah. She pulled in and jumped out of the car, rushing to the entrance. The woman followed, her footsteps hurried. "We have to call the police. Please." Inside, the attendant looked up, surprise evident on his face. "What's going on?" "Call the police. We need help." Sarah shouted, turning back to the woman beside her, but she froze as she caught sight of her. The woman was staring past her, her face pale and her expression shifting to one of pure horror. "They found us," she whispered, her voice trembling. Before Sarah could react, the woman turned and bolted for the door, disappearing into the night. "Wait!" Sarah shouted, but it was too late. The attendant stepped forward, his face grave. "What just happened?" "I don't know," Sarah said, panic gripping her. She said someone was after her. He shook his head, looking more concerned than ever. "You should get out of here. This place is not safe at night." Confusion washed over Sarah as she turned back toward the door. She couldn't believe what just happened. She had just encountered someone in danger, and now she was gone, swallowed by the night. As she stepped outside, a chill wrapped around her, and the shadows seemed to stretch ominously. "Where did she go?" Sarah murmured, scanning the darkness. But there was no sign of the woman, only silence. The air felt heavy, suffocating, and an unsettling feeling settled in her gut. Just as she was about to get back in her car, she heard it again, the sound of footsteps crunching on gravel. She whipped around to see a dark figure emerging from the tree line. Panic surged through her as she jumped into her car and locked the doors, the engine roaring to life. The figure stopped, illuminated by her headlights, a man with wild hair, eyes wide and manic. "Help me! They're coming," he shouted, echoing the same words the woman had said. Sarah's heart raced, and she glanced in the rearview mirror. The gas station attendant stood at the door, watching her, but he didn't move to help. Feeling trapped, she slammed her foot on the gas and sped out of the parking lot, leaving the gas station behind. The voice echoed in her mind as she drove into the night, and she couldn't shake the image of the woman or the frantic man. As she drove home, the memory haunted her. She never learned who the woman was or why she was on the highway that night, but the stories about the highway of tears replayed in her mind. The ghostly figures of lost souls who lingered there, forever searching for help. It was the summer of 2010 when Mark, a truck driver, found himself hauling a load through the back roads of Oregon during the early hours of the morning. The air was thick with fog, and the headlights of his truck barely penetrated the dense mist that hung over the road. He had been driving for hours, and the monotony of the empty highway was beginning to wear on him. As he approached a particularly isolated stretch of road, Mark spotted a figure standing at the edge, waving for a ride. It was unusual to see anyone out here this late, but he slowed down, his curiosity piqued. As he rolled down the window, he saw a young woman in a faded denim jacket and jeans, her hair tousled and damp from the fog. "Can you give me a lift?" she asked, her voice slightly shaky but pleading. Mark hesitated, glancing at the road behind him. "Where are you headed?" "Just up the road a bit," she replied, looking around nervously. "I really need to get home." Against his better judgment, he opened the door and motioned for her to get in. "Hop in. It's a long way to walk." She climbed into the passenger seat, giving him a grateful smile. Mark could see she was cold, her arms crossed tightly against her body. "Thank you so much," she said softly. As they drove, Mark tried to make conversation. "What are you doing out here so late?" She sighed, glancing out the window. "Just visiting some friends. I missed my ride back and decided to walk." He nodded, the silence growing thick between them. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She seemed distant, lost in thought as she stared into the fog outside. After several minutes, Mark noticed that the mist was starting to lift slightly, revealing the outline of a small house just off the side of the road. "Are you sure you want to get dropped off here?" he asked. "It looks pretty isolated." "I'll be fine," she assured him. "Thank you for the ride." Mark pulled over, and she opened the door, stepping out into the darkness. Just as he was about to drive off, she turned back, her face pale. "Wait. Can you help me with something?" "Sure, what do you need?" he asked, intrigued. "I need to find my brother. He went missing a while ago, and I think he might be around here somewhere." Her voice quivered with emotion. Mark felt a pang of sympathy. "I can help you look for him. Where was the last place you saw him?" But the young woman just shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. "I don't know. I just have to find him." Feeling uneasy, Mark nodded slowly. "Okay, but I can't stay out here long. It's dangerous at night." As he pulled away from the house, he glanced in the rearview mirror, expecting to see her waving goodbye. Instead, he saw her standing in the same spot, staring after him with an expression of despair. Mark drove on, the weight of the encounter pressing heavily on him. A nagging feeling gnawed at him. He decided to pull into a nearby diner to grab a cup of coffee and shake off the eerie sensation. The diner was nearly empty, save for a few patrons and a sleepy waitress behind the counter. Mark settled into a booth, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling he couldn't quite pinpoint. The waitress poured him a cup of coffee, and he tried to relax. "Long night?" she asked, eyeing him curiously. "Yeah," he replied, forcing a smile. "Just gave a hitchhiker a ride." Her expression changed, and she leaned in closer. Did she have dark hair and a denim jacket? Mark nodded, surprised. "You know her?" The waitress's face paled. "You shouldn't have picked her up. She's been gone for years." "What do you mean?" The waitress glanced around, lowering her voice. "She disappeared on this very highway. They found her car, but her body was never found. They say she haunts the roads, trying to find her way home." Mark felt a chill wash over him as he recalled the young woman's desperate eyes. "But she was right there. I just dropped her off." The waitress shook her head, a look of pity in her eyes. "People see her all the time. They think they're helping, but she's not alive. She's just a phantom, searching for something she can never find." The words sent shivers down Mark's spine. He paid his bill and rushed back to his truck, feeling the weight of the encounter pressing down on him. The road ahead felt darker than before, and he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As he drove home, he glanced in the passenger seat, half expecting to see her there. But the seat was empty, and the only sound was the rumble of the tires on the asphalt. Days passed, but the memory lingered. Mark couldn't stop thinking about the woman in the denim jacket, her search for her brother. He felt a sense of sorrow for her, caught in a cycle of loss, forever wandering the roads. Late one night in 2015, Lisa was driving home from a late shift at the hospital. The winding roads through the countryside were usually quiet, but tonight felt different. A storm had rolled in, and rain poured down, making visibility poor. As she navigated the narrow roads, her thoughts drifted to her long day at work. Suddenly, she spotted something in the headlights, a figure standing by the side of the road. Lisa slowed down, her heart racing as she squinted through the rain. It was a child, a young girl, soaked and alone. Lisa felt a rush of concern. She pulled over, rolling down her window. "Are you okay?" she called out, her voice barely audible over the rain. The girl looked up, her face pale and drawn. "Please, can you help me?" the girl said, her voice shaking. "I'm lost. I need to get home." "Where's your home?" Lisa asked, glancing around nervously. "Just down the road." "Please, I'm scared," the girl pleaded, her eyes wide. Lisa's heart ached for her. "Okay, get in. I'll take you home." The girl climbed into the back seat, and Lisa could see her shivering. She turned the heater on, trying to make the child comfortable. "What's your name?" "Emily," the girl replied softly. "Emily, where do you live?" Lisa asked as she pulled back onto the road. "Just a little further down," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My brother is waiting for me." Lisa glanced in the rearview mirror and noticed something strange. The girl's eyes were dark, almost pitch black, and they seemed to absorb the light. "Are you okay?" Lisa asked, a sense of unease creeping in. "I'm fine," Emily said, but her tone felt off. There was an unsettling edge to it that sent shivers down Lisa's spine. As they drove, Lisa felt a growing sense of dread. She glanced at the girl again, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. "How did you end up out here?" "I was playing outside with my brother, and I got lost," Emily replied, her voice distant. Lisa's heart raced. "Where's your brother now?" "He's waiting for me at home." "You'll help me get there, right?" "Of course," Lisa said, trying to sound reassuring. But her instincts were screaming that something wasn't right. As they continued down the road, Lisa noticed that the trees were thinning, and the landscape was becoming more desolate. The rain hammered against the windshield, making it hard to see. She felt a knot in her stomach, an unshakable feeling of foreboding. Suddenly, Emily spoke again, her voice chillingly calm. "You need to stop the car." "What?" Lisa asked, bewildered. "Why?" "Stop the car now," Emily insisted, her tone more demanding. Panic surged through Lisa. "No, I need to get you home." "I said stop," Emily shouted, her voice echoing in the car. Against her better judgment, Lisa slammed on the brakes. The tires screeched, and the car skidded to a halt. "What's going on?" Emily turned to her, and Lisa felt her blood run cold. The girl's eyes were fully black now, devoid of any color or light. "Let me out," Emily commanded, her voice low and unnerving. Lisa shook her head, fear gripping her. "No. You're just a child." "Let me out," the girl screamed, her voice growing louder. Without thinking, Lisa threw the car into reverse and sped away, the headlights cutting through the darkness. She glanced back, half expecting to see the girl chasing her, but there was nothing but rain and darkness. Heart racing, she drove until she reached a gas station, her breath coming in short gasps. She stumbled out of the car, her hands shaking as she pressed her back against the building, desperate for a moment to collect herself. "What happened?" the clerk asked, eyeing her with concern. "I picked up a girl, she was lost." But she wasn't normal, her eyes, Lisa stammered, struggling to catch her breath. The clerk's expression shifted to one of fear. "You saw one of them? What do you mean?" Lisa asked, confusion flooding her. "The black-eyed children," he whispered, his voice low. "They wander around at night, looking for help. But once you let them in, they never leave." Lisa's heart sank as she recalled the girl's piercing gaze. She hadn't just picked up a lost child, she had invited something malevolent into her car. She had narrowly escaped a fate she couldn't even begin to comprehend. In 2018, Jason was on a long road trip across the United States, driving through the remote stretches of New Mexico. He had planned his route carefully, but exhaustion began to set in as night fell. The road was lonely, illuminated only by the flickering lights of his headlights. As he approached a rest stop, he saw a flickering sign, "Open 24 hours." He pulled in, hoping to stretch his legs and grab a cup of coffee to keep himself alert. The rest stop was eerily quiet, but he felt a sense of relief at the sight of the building. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glare on the empty space. A single attendant stood behind the counter, glancing up as Jason entered. "Late night drive?" the attendant asked, a hint of concern in his voice. "Yeah, just trying to stay awake," Jason replied, moving to the coffee machine. He poured himself a cup and took a deep breath, inhaling the rich aroma. As he sipped his coffee, he felt an unusual chill in the air. Jason glanced around, noticing an old map on the wall covered in dust. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Suddenly, he heard the unmistakable sound of a child laughing outside. He frowned, stepping toward the door. It was odd to hear children at this hour. Opening the door, he peered outside, scanning the dark parking lot. There were no children in sight, just the dimly lit asphalt and the trees rustling in the wind. Confused, he stepped back inside, shaking off the eerie feeling. "Did you hear that?" he asked the attendant. "Hear what?" the attendant replied, looking at him quizzically. "The laughter, like a child." It was outside. The attendant shrugged, disinterested. "There's nothing out there. Just a quiet night." Jason took another sip of coffee, but unease settled in his gut. He tried to push it aside, but the laughter echoed in his mind, haunting him. After a few minutes, he decided to head back to his car. As he walked toward the exit, he glanced at the old map again. Something caught his eye, a strange symbol marked on it, close to the rest stop. It looked like a crude drawing of a house. Intrigued, he moved closer, but as he did, he felt a chill sweep through the air. The laughter returned, louder this time, echoing through the rest stop. He spun around, but the building was empty, save for the attendant, who seemed oblivious to the sound. "Are you sure you didn't hear that?" Jason asked again, his voice rising. The attendant raised an eyebrow. "You need to leave if you're feeling paranoid. It's just a rest stop." Feeling unsettled, Jason left the building and walked back to his car. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone behind him, but the lot was empty. As he settled into his seat, he locked the doors, the feeling of dread still clinging to him. Just as he was about to start the engine, he heard a soft tap on the window. Jason jumped, turning to see a little girl standing outside, her face pale and her eyes wide. "Help me," she whispered, her voice hauntingly echoing. Panic surged through him as he hesitated. "What do you need?" She pointed toward the woods behind the rest stop. "I'm lost. I can't find my way home." "Where are your parents?" Jason asked, but the girl just shook her head, her expression growing more desperate. "Please. You have to help me." Heart pounding, Jason opened the door a crack, fear flooding him. "You shouldn't be out here alone. It's not safe." But as he looked into her eyes, he felt something pull him in, a dark void that made his blood run cold. "No," he said, shaking his head. "Get away from my car." The girl's expression changed, her smile turning into a twisted grin. You can't leave me. I need to go home. Just as Jason was about to slam the door shut, he felt something cold brush against his arm. He jerked back, realizing the girl was gone. Panic surged through him, and he started the engine, speeding away from the rest stop as fast as he could. As he drove down the dark highway, the laughter echoed in his ears, haunting him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, lurking in the shadows. Days later, he discovered that the rest stop had a dark history, a place where children had gone missing over the years. No one knew what happened to them, but the locals whispered about the spirits that lingered, searching for help that would never come. Jason could never forget that night, the ghostly girl with her hollow eyes. He couldn't escape the feeling that she was still out there, waiting for someone to find her, forever lost in the darkness. In 2012, a couple named Tom and Rachel decided to take a weekend trip to a cabin in the woods of Vermont. They were looking forward to a weekend of relaxation, away from their busy lives. The cabin was quaint, nestled among the trees, and they settled in quickly. On the first night, they built a fire and spent the evening reminiscing about their favorite memories. As the night wore on, Rachel suggested they play a game of cards. They set up a small table near the fireplace, laughter filling the air. Just as they were getting into the game, Tom noticed a flicker of movement outside the window. He glanced up, expecting to see a deer or some other wildlife, but instead, he saw a figure, a woman in a white dress standing among the trees. "Hey, do you see that?" he asked Rachel, pointing outside. Rachel looked but shook her head. "See what?" There was a woman outside, in white. "Are you sure you're not imagining things?" she teased. "You've been working too hard." Tom shrugged it off, but the image lingered in his mind. As the night wore on, he tried to push it aside, but the feeling of being watched crept over him. The next morning, they decided to explore the surrounding area. They hiked through the woods, admiring the beauty of nature. But as they walked, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. "Do you feel that?" he asked Rachel. "Feel what?" she replied, looking puzzled. "It's like, something is following us," he said, glancing over his shoulder. Rachel laughed. "You're just paranoid. It's probably just your imagination." But that night, as they settled in for bed, Tom was restless. He couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Just as he was about to drift off, he heard a soft whispering. It was faint, but it sent chills down his spine. "Tom. Tom." He sat up in bed, heart racing. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, turning to Rachel. "Hear what?" she mumbled, half asleep. "Someone is calling my name," he insisted, his voice shaky. Rachel rolled over, clearly annoyed. "You're imagining things. Go to sleep." Reluctantly, Tom lay back down, but sleep wouldn't come. The whispering continued, a haunting melody that danced on the edges of his mind. He finally decided to get up and check the living room, hoping to find the source of the sound. As he stepped into the main room, the air grew cold, and he felt an inexplicable pull toward the window. He approached it cautiously and peered outside. The woman was there again, standing among the trees, her white dress billowing in the wind. She raised her hand, as if beckoning him to come closer. "Tom," she whispered, her voice ethereal. Fear coursed through him as he stumbled back, heart racing. "What do you want?" he shouted, but she only stared, her eyes filled with sadness. Suddenly, the whispering intensified, echoing around him. He felt an overwhelming urge to open the door and step outside. But just as he reached for the handle, he heard Rachel's voice behind him. "Tom! What are you doing?" He turned to see her standing in the doorway, looking terrified. "There's someone outside," he shouted, but she shook her head. "Let's just go back to bed. You're scaring me." The woman outside raised her hand again, her expression pleading. Tom felt a pull toward her, a deep longing to understand. "I have to help her," he yelled, pushing past Rachel and flinging open the door. Tom, no. Rachel cried, but he stepped outside, the cold night air wrapping around him. The woman took a step forward, her voice soft and haunting. Help me, Tom. Before he could respond, she vanished, leaving him standing alone in the darkness. Rachel rushed outside, grabbing his arm. What just happened? I saw her. Tom insisted, looking around frantically. She was right here. There's no one here, Tom. Rachel argued, her voice trembling. Let's just go inside. Feeling disoriented, Tom let Rachel pull him back into the cabin, but the feeling of unease lingered. That night, he couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. As they packed up the next morning, Tom couldn't shake the image of the woman from his mind. Who was she? He wondered aloud. I don't know, but we should leave, Rachel replied, glancing nervously out the window. Just before they drove away, Tom glanced back at the cabin, feeling an inexplicable sadness. The woman's presence lingered, a ghostly echo of a past he couldn't understand. Months later, they learned about the cabin's history, a tragic tale of a woman who had disappeared long ago, searching for something she could never find. Tom couldn't help but feel connected to her story, forever haunted by the ghostly encounter. In 2019, Alex was driving home after a long day of work. It was late, and the sun had set hours ago, leaving the road shrouded in darkness. He had just crossed into the outskirts of a small town when he realized he needed gas. As he drove further, he spotted a gas station illuminated by flickering lights. Relieved, he pulled in, eager to fill up and get back on the road. The place seemed old, with peeling paint and rusted pumps, but he didn't mind. Inside, the dimly lit convenience store was empty except for an older clerk who looked up as Alex entered. Evening, the clerk greeted, his voice gravelly. Hi there. Just filling up, Alex replied, moving toward the cooler for a drink. He grabbed a soda and approached the counter. The clerk scanned his items but seemed distracted. You know, this place has a history, he said suddenly, his gaze distant. What do you mean? Alex asked, curious. There've been some strange occurrences here. People disappearing in the area, the clerk replied, his eyes narrowing. You should be careful. Is that so? Alex replied, trying to laugh it off. Just filling up my tank. Yeah, well, just keep an eye out, the clerk warned. You never know who, or what, might be lurking around. With a nervous chuckle, Alex paid for his gas and headed back outside. He filled up his tank, glancing around the empty lot. The night air felt heavy, and he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As he climbed back into his car, he noticed something strange out of the corner of his eye, a shadow darting behind a nearby building. He hesitated, feeling a twinge of unease, but dismissed it. It's just your imagination, he muttered to himself. Suddenly, the gas station's lights flickered, and a loud bang echoed from inside. Startled, Alex looked back to see the clerk standing in the doorway, eyes wide with fear. Get out of here, he shouted. Before Alex could react, the lights went out completely, plunging the area into darkness. Panic surged through him as he fumbled for his keys. Just then, a loud thud reverberated through the night, followed by the sound of footsteps approaching. Heart racing, he started the engine and floored it out of the gas station, glancing in the rearview mirror. The clerk stood in the doorway, waving his arms frantically, but the gas station looked abandoned now, shrouded in darkness. As he drove down the road, Alex couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to him. What had just happened? He felt as if he had narrowly escaped something sinister, lurking just beyond his reach. Days later, he learned about a string of disappearances connected to that very gas station, a dark history that left him haunted. He could never shake the feeling that whatever had lurked in the shadows was still out there, waiting for its next victim. In 2020, Sarah was driving home late one night after a party. The roads were deserted, and her mind drifted as she navigated the winding highways. As she approached a particularly dark stretch of road, she saw a figure up ahead, someone standing by the side of the road, thumb extended. Sarah slowed down, unsure. She had heard stories about picking up hitchhikers, but something compelled her to stop. As she pulled over, the figure came into view, a young man, looking disheveled and weary. "Hey, thanks for stopping," he said, climbing into the passenger seat. "I really appreciate it. I've been waiting for ages." "No problem," Sarah replied, glancing over at him. "Where are you headed?" "Just down the road a bit," he said, his voice quiet. "I missed my bus and now I'm trying to get home." As they drove, Sarah noticed something odd about him. His eyes were glassy, and he seemed to be staring into space, lost in thought. "You okay?" she asked, concern creeping into her voice. "Yeah, just tired," he mumbled, shaking his head slightly. They continued driving in silence, and Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. She tried to make small talk. "So, what's your name?" "Jake," he replied, still staring blankly ahead. "Jake, huh? Where do you live?" Sarah asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "Just a little further," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Suddenly, Sarah spotted a sign indicating a nearby town. "Are you sure this is the right way?" she asked, glancing at him. "Yeah, it's fine," he replied, but his tone had shifted, becoming almost impatient. Feeling uneasy, Sarah decided to change the subject. "What do you do for fun?" But Jake didn't respond. Instead, he just stared ahead, his expression growing more distant. As they neared a turnoff, Sarah felt a jolt of fear. "Where do I turn?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Keep going," Jake said flatly. Panic set in as she realized she didn't know where she was heading. "Jake, I think I need to get you out of the car," she said, slowing down. "Why?" "I just need to get home," he insisted, his voice low. "No, you're scaring me." "You need to get out," Sarah replied, her heart racing. Just then, Jake turned to her, and she gasped in horror. His eyes were empty, black voids that seemed to absorb the light. "You can't leave me," he hissed, his voice echoing with a chilling intensity. Terrified, Sarah slammed on the brakes, and the car skidded to a halt. "Get out," she screamed, but he just stared at her, unmoving. In a moment of sheer panic, Sarah threw the door open and stumbled out of the car, running away into the night. She heard Jake's voice behind her, calling her name, but she didn't stop. After what felt like an eternity, she reached a nearby house and pounded on the door. The lights flicked on, and a woman opened it, her expression one of concern. "What's wrong?" the woman asked, looking past Sarah at the dark road. I was just driving, and I picked up a hitchhiker," Sarah gasped, trying to catch her breath. The woman's face paled. "You shouldn't have done that. There's a story about a boy who died in a crash around here. They say he's still looking for a ride." Fear washed over Sarah as she realized what she had encountered. She hadn't just picked up a hitchhiker, she had let a ghost into her car. The woman led her inside, and they called the police, but when they searched the area, they found nothing. Sarah never forgot that night, the ghostly hitchhiker with his empty gaze. She drove past that stretch of road many times after, but she could never shake the feeling that he was still out there, wandering the roads in search of a ride that would never come. In 2021, Ryan and his friends decided to take a road trip to explore abandoned places. They had heard rumors about an old hotel deep in the woods that was said to be haunted. Excited for an adventure, they loaded up their gear and set off. After hours of driving, they finally arrived at the hotel. The structure was imposing, with broken windows and overgrown vegetation surrounding it. Despite its dilapidated state, they felt a thrill of excitement as they approached the entrance. Once inside, they found dust-covered furniture and remnants of a once lively establishment. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay, but their adventurous spirits pushed them onward. They explored the ground floor, discovering old photographs and abandoned belongings left behind by former guests. It felt as if time had stopped in this place, and they couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. As night fell, they decided to set up camp in the lobby. They lit candles and shared ghost stories, laughter echoing off the walls. But as the candles flickered, an unsettling chill crept through the air. Ryan noticed a door at the far end of the lobby, slightly ajar. Curiosity piqued, he ventured toward it, glancing back at his friends. "I'm going to check this out," he called, pushing the door open. The hallway beyond was dark and musty, and he could hear the sound of dripping water echoing. He felt a shiver run down his spine but pressed on. As he walked down the corridor, the air grew colder, and he suddenly felt a presence behind him. He turned quickly, but there was nothing there. Shaking off the feeling, he continued until he reached a large room at the end of the hall. Inside, the room was filled with old furniture, but what caught his eye was a large mirror hanging on the wall. It was ornate and dusty, but as he stepped closer, he noticed something strange. His reflection seemed to shimmer, and for a brief moment, he saw a figure behind him, a woman in a white dress. He spun around, heart racing, but again, there was no one there. Breathing heavily, Ryan approached the mirror again, but this time, the woman was gone. "Guys," he called, his voice echoing in the empty space. "You've got to see this." His friends followed him into the room, and he pointed at the mirror. "Did you see that?" he asked, breathless. "What?" one of his friends replied, looking confused. "I saw a woman. She was right here." "Are you sure you're not just spooked?" another friend laughed, but Ryan felt a chill creeping back in. Deciding to leave the room, they returned to the lobby, but the atmosphere had shifted. The laughter from earlier felt distant, replaced by an unsettling silence. Suddenly, they heard a loud crash from upstairs, followed by the sound of footsteps. The group exchanged nervous glances, adrenaline surging through them. "Let's check it out," Ryan suggested, trying to sound braver than he felt. They cautiously climbed the creaky staircase, the sound of their footsteps echoing in the empty space. At the top, they saw a door swinging open and closed, as if someone, or something, was beckoning them inside. Heart pounding, they approached the door and pushed it open. Inside, the room was dimly lit, and the air felt thick with tension. In the corner, they saw the same woman Ryan had glimpsed in the mirror, her expression mournful. She stood silently, her eyes filled with sorrow. "Who are you?" Ryan asked, his voice trembling. The woman pointed toward the window, her gaze distant. "Help me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Fear coursed through Ryan, but he felt an overwhelming urge to help her. "What do you need?" he asked, taking a step closer. But as he reached for her, she vanished, leaving only a chill in the air. The room fell silent, and his friends looked at him, fear etched on their faces. "Did you see that?" Ryan asked, but they shook their heads, disbelief in their eyes. Feeling a mix of fear and determination, Ryan decided they needed to leave. The hotel held too many secrets, and he could feel the weight of the past pressing down on them. As they made their way back to the entrance, the atmosphere felt oppressive, as if they were being watched. Just before they stepped outside, Ryan glanced back one last time. In the mirror, he saw the woman again, her expression a mix of hope and sadness. "We'll come back," he promised her, but as he turned to leave, he felt a chill envelop him. Years later, Ryan still thought about that night, the haunted hotel, and the woman who had reached out for help. He could never shake the feeling that he had left something behind, something that needed to be found. In 2022, a group of high school seniors decided to explore the abandoned Hillcrest High, rumored to be haunted by a student who had vanished years ago. Armed with flashlights and a sense of adventure, they crept inside, hearts racing with excitement. As they wandered through the dark hallways, they found lockers covered in dust and classrooms filled with broken furniture. The air felt heavy, and an eerie silence enveloped them. Did you guys hear that? One of the students, Mia, asked, her voice trembling. Hear what? Another friend, Jake, replied dismissively. Like whispers, Mia insisted, glancing around nervously. Probably just the wind, Jake shrugged, but Mia couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. As they ventured deeper into the school, they stumbled upon an old gymnasium. The floorboards creaked beneath their feet, and the atmosphere felt charged with energy. Suddenly, the lights flickered, causing everyone to jump. Okay, this place is creepy, Mia said, trying to laugh it off. Let's check out the stage, Jake suggested, leading the way. As they climbed onto the stage, a chill swept through the room. The whispers grew louder, echoing off the walls. Help me, a voice called, sending shivers down Mia's spine. Did you hear that? She gasped, eyes wide. Jake nodded, his expression serious. We should go. But before they could leave, a shadow darted across the stage, and they all froze. The whispers intensified, swirling around them. Help me, the voice echoed again, more insistent this time. Who are you? Mia called out, fear gripping her. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the edge of the stage, a girl in a tattered school uniform, her eyes wide and pleading. Please, help me, she cried, her voice breaking. Mia's heart raced. What do you need? She asked, stepping forward. The girl pointed toward the exit, her expression desperate. I can't leave. Realizing the girl was trapped in the school, Mia felt an overwhelming urge to help. We'll find a way to help you, she promised. But just then, the gym doors slammed shut, plunging them into darkness. Panic surged through the group as they banged on the door, but it wouldn't budge. Stay together. Jake shouted, trying to keep everyone calm. The whispers grew louder, filling the space around them. Help me, help me. Mia felt a surge of courage. We have to find a way out, she yelled, leading the group toward a nearby door. They pushed it open, stumbling into a dark hallway. As they ran, the whispers followed them, echoing in their ears. Help me, help me. Finally, they burst through a side door and found themselves outside, gasping for breath. The night air felt refreshing, but fear lingered in their hearts. What just happened? Mia panted, looking back at the school. I don't know, but we need to leave, Jake replied, glancing over his shoulder. As they drove away, Mia couldn't shake the feeling of the girl's desperate gaze. She wondered if they had done enough to help her, if she would ever find peace. Years later, Mia returned to Hillcrest High, determined to uncover the truth about the girl's disappearance. What she found would change everything and connect her to a story that had haunted the town for generations.